or I'm going to try to. I should be recording. Great. And then I'll introduce our distinguished speakers. Bob Chang is professor of law and executive director of the Fred T. Korematsu Center for Law and Equality here at Seattle U Law. I still say here, even though we're clearly in my dining room. And previously served as Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Development at the law school. Professor Chang's scholarship is primarily in the area of race and interethnic relations. He authored Disoriented, Asian Americans, Law and the Nation State, co-edited Minority Relations, Intergroup Conflict and Cooperation, and has written more than 50 articles, essays, and chapters published in leading law reviews and books on critical race theory, Latinx critical theory, and Asian American legal studies. Professor Chang has countless accomplishments that I could name, but I'm going to highlight just a couple today. In 2014, he was co-recipient of the Goldmark Distinguished Service Award from the Legal Foundation of Washington for his leadership on a statewide task force on race and the criminal justice system. In 2018, the Society of American Law Teachers recognized Professor Chang with the M. Shannara Gilbert Human Rights Award for his role in successfully taking to trial a constitutional challenge to the enactment and enforcement of a facially neutral law that was used to terminate the Mexican American Studies program at the Tucson Unified School District. Professor Chang is a dedicated teacher and mentor, and that brings me to my next introduction, Matt Sanders. Matt is a 2012 graduate of this law school, and he is the juvenile unit supervising attorney for the King County Department of Public Defense ACA division. He brings an impressive set of career accomplishments to the role. In 2018, after a 2-month jury trial, he obtained an acquittal for a Black father falsely accused of murder. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Since 2013, Matt has represented marginalized members of the King County community and has taken dozens of cases to trial. He is regarded as one of the most accomplished trial attorneys in the Associated Counsel for the Accused Division of the Public Defender's Office. And in addition to his stellar work as an attorney, Matt has shown a real commitment to social justice through his volunteer work and his graduation from the Washington Leadership Institute. One of the many reasons we're excited to have him moderate the discussion today is that he is also a former Korematsu Center fellow and a mentee of Professor Chang's. Thank you, Matt, for being here. I'm excited to talk with these two, but before I do, let me make a disclaimer. Matt is here in his personal capacity. His comments represent his own views and not those of the King County Department of Public Defense. And with that, I will kick it over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Erin, and I apologize for keeping everyone in suspense. I think one of the things about being a public defender is that things always come up unexpectedly. But I wanted to thank everyone for joining us this evening before the very important Seahawks game for this virtual town hall that we're all becoming so very acquainted with these days. I have the pleasure of being with Professor Bob Chang. It's hard for me to call him Bob. I'm so used to calling him Professor Chang since he was my former my former professor, and technically my former boss. But as Erin mentioned, I'm familiar with the Korematsu Center, but I assume not everyone is as familiar as I am. And so, Professor Chang, if you wouldn't mind, sort of as an initial question, just sharing the sort of origin story of the Korematsu Center, if you will.
Sure, happy to do that. And also I'm so happy to see all of you. It's I imagine what it would be like to be in a room with all of you, to be able to go around the room and say hello, all the different connections that I have with so many of you, and also for all of you to connect with all the people in this room with whom you have connections. And also the Zoom makes it possible for us to program right up to the beginning of the Seahawks game, because I imagine we would not have this kind of crowd if we were in real life in a room with the Seahawks game at 5:30. I know it's an important game for those who follow it. So anyway, in terms of the Korematsu Center, we launched in 2009, and I came here to start a center. But in terms of the center that I wanted to start as an academic, the center was going to be called the Center for the Study of Law and Inequality. because that's what academics do. And then I had a conversation it was at Stumptown, right, Lori? Is that right, Lori? It's interactive, so it's
It was at the restaurant next door. Yes, whatever that was.
Press?
Yes.
No, weren't we downstairs in Stumptown where they're grinding the coffee?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's what I remember. But we're talking about this center, and Lori comes up with this great idea. Well, have you thought about naming it after Fred Korematsu? And for those of you who may not be familiar, Lorraine Bannal was one of the attorneys who was on the legal team, the Coram Nobis legal team that worked to overturn Fred Korematsu's wartime conviction. And she did that successfully. And so, we had some options there. We could wait for somebody to give us a lot of money and then we name it after them, or we could name it after a civil rights icon. And then I remember that trip down to San Francisco, meeting with Karen. And I know that Karen is registered for this. I don't know if she's I only see 49 people at a time. So I don't know if she ended up being able to join us. She did register, and it's probably good she's not here because then I will be less tongue-tied. And so if she were here, I would be starstruck and just not able to talk. And so now I can speak a little bit without that kind of pressure of having her. But I remember meeting with her and her mother, and I think her sister was also there in Jack London Square. And we talked about this idea of this center. And the family gave us their blessing. And it really changed in a lot of ways the trajectory of the center, the arc. It allowed us to participate on the national stage immediately because we could go in as the Fred T. Korematsu Center for Law and Equality. And it also made it more active. It was for something rather than the more academic approach, the study of law and inequality. It was a heavy burden though, because if you think about it, to be able, to have the responsibility of having to uphold and advance the legacy of Fred Korematsu. But it's one that I think that we've all embraced in the center. And so 2009, we got started. And so that's very quickly, Matt, the origin story.
Now, you said a lot there, and I think probably one of the best things we could do is just start off with one of the questions from the participants. I think it was Judge Harriet Cody, class of 75. She had asked, how have the activities of the center evolved since it began?
Sure. So we conceived of the mission. So the mission of the center, the tagline is advancing justice through research, advocacy, and education. And so when I think a little bit about the activities of the center, in a lot of ways, it's really around each of those ideas. And so in terms of research, one of the early projects that emerged from our very first run through of the Civil Rights Clinic was to examine the practices of the Border Patrol on the Olympic Peninsula. And so the students engaged in this project to get records. They also engaged with community organizations. And so it was very much trying to be responsive to the needs of the community to try to find out this information to create this knowledge product that might be used for advocacy, but research focus in terms of how it started. Another example in terms of the way that we think about the center's mission and advancing it through research includes, Erin had mentioned the Goldmark Award, which was for work on the Race and Criminal Justice System Task Force. And so leading a group of researchers to produce a preliminary report on race and Washington's criminal justice system and involving many stakeholders and also many people within the law school. So including students, graduates and professors. So in terms of thinking about a center, the idea really was to create something that was the center, that could be a center rather than something off to the side that is called a center. And then in terms of how we involve our students in this work, one, sometimes it's through internships. Matt was an early fellow of the Korematsu Center. And over time, we've developed more fully the Civil Rights Clinic. And so we used to run it just one semester each term. And now we run it two semesters, fall and spring, because we learned that when you do this work, it's not just like, oh, it's in the spring when there's advocacy work to be done. It's sort of all the time, which is challenging. And in a lot of ways, the challenge, we're able to meet it because I'm able to work with people like Professor Lorraine Bannal, like Professor Charlotte Garden. I know your name, Charlotte, who is the faculty litigation director. I'm able to work with staff attorney and assistant director Jessica Levin, who has been with the center since 2013. And I'm also able to work with Melissa Lee, who is also a staff attorney and assistant director of the center. And most recently, we welcomed Kate Miller, who is our inaugural Weil, Gottschall and Manges LLC advocacy fellow. And she's with us for 20 months, minus 10 days now. So she started about 10 days ago. And it's by having that kind of broad support in terms of the people doing this work that we are able to involve our students in the work that we do, whether it's the research-oriented projects, producing reports, whether it's with regard to amicus briefs, whether it's with regard to our impact litigation. And so Judge Cody had asked, how do our activities fit in terms of the school? Well, so part of it is we involve our faculty colleagues, we involve our students in this work, and the goal really, when we think about the students that we work with, it's for them to be involved in the work with us while they're here, but then to give them the tools and also the taste for this, so that when they go out into the world, that they continue doing this work. And I just saw Christopher Bhang, sort of light up in terms of, his Zoom box just appeared. And Christopher is one of the people who was in the very first clinic that we did. And it's hard talking about this stuff because I get distracted because I want to talk about, so Judge Cody. So here's a specific example of Christopher Bhang. He's in our first civil rights clinic. And we reached out to an attorney in Arizona who was litigating the Arizona ethnic studies case. Arizona had passed a law that was used to terminate the Mexican American Studies program at the Tucson Unified School District. Now, this was the same legislature that did SB 1070. Lots of resources going in around the country for SB 1070, and that's the famous show your papers law. Very little attention being paid to the ethnic studies case. And so we offered to assist him. And Chris and his colleague, Katie Kuhlenberg, we took them down during spring break, and we helped prepare the attorney for the summary judgment argument in that hearing. And so then in terms of thinking about giving the students that experience, that taste, and then to watch them years later, to see Chris go off and work for, continue his work with the Office for Civil Rights in Seattle, and then move over to King County. And then also, I think you're another graduate of the Washington Leadership Institute. Am I right about that?
The COVID class are on hold right now, actually, but yes.
Well, So you'll get a chance to do that. You know, that's something that Matt Sanders had done, participated in earlier. And so it's this idea, Judge Cody, where we work with the students to create, you know, the impact in doing this work. And then, you know, in some ways, it's sort of like planting seeds that germinate. And it's just such a pleasure to watch them go out there and do this great work. And then it's also really great sometimes when they come back and say, can we work with you on some things? When they get to a point in their career where they say, I want to, you know, support your work in you know, being on the new task force that I know that we'll talk about later. So I realize I've gone on and on and on. So let me stop.
Well, I kind of like that metaphor you use, like seeds that germinate. You know, when you originally envisioned it, it was, you know, going to be amicus briefs, and that was going to be a huge contribution. But as a result of circumstances, you're able to move to impact litigation, civil litigation. And you alluded to some of it with Arizona, but on the national stage, I know that the Korematsu Center has done cool things, impactful things, things that have changed people's lives. And so Arizona being one example, but what ended up happening with that case? And in addition to that, are there other examples of the Korematsu Center bringing its talents to bear on the national stage?
Sure. So you're exactly right that when we began the clinic, we focused on amicus briefs. And I think part of that had to do with an initial, you know, vision that we had. And it's this idea in some ways that we saw the courts as being this anti-democratic institution. You know, there would be the litigants challenging, you know, fighting over some law, and then there would be an outcome that affects many others who have no say in that litigation. And we saw amicus briefs as a way to bring their voices in so that the judges then would gain an appreciation for this. The other thing is that it was also consistent with my own sort of comfort level with law practice. I began law teaching in 1992, and I didn't take my first bar exam until 2011. You know, 19 years into law teaching. That was a miserable summer. It's like, I just cannot believe, like, it's like, I'm actually back in the room where I was staying, you know, like almost all the time, studying for that bar exam. And fortunately, I did succeed, although I don't know, when I tell my students this, it's like, when you take it, it's okay if you have a moment of panic. And I had a moment of panic with that first question. I'm reading it and I'm thinking, family law, tort, some other trust and estates thing. And I'm like, I just froze. And you know, what I tell my students is that it'll happen to you. And what you need to do is go back to the reservoir that you have, the study that you've done, to start with the thing that you know and just build.
I think this is non-responsive, Professor Chang.
Yeah, thank you.
This is non-responsive because you've done stuff. You guys have done things in Arizona, Alaska,
Sure.
historic, Hispanic studies courses. I feel like you can, you know, let some of these people know, like what, you know, like what this center does, because it's a part of Seattle. And so, like, I think all of us can take a certain measure of pride in seeing the Korematsu go out there and do good.
Sure.
So if you wouldn't mind sharing some of those.
And so, you know, the Arizona case is one that I'm so proud of in terms of the contribution that we were able to make. And so initially we started out helping a solo practitioner, and then he asked us to become co-counsel. We led the effort. Most of the case ended up being lost at summary judgment. And so we led the effort at the Ninth Circuit to get that overturned and remanded. And then we were able to take it to trial. I mean, the other thing, though, is as excited as I am to do this work, and you know, all of those here who are involved in this work, we also understand our limitations. And so we had a New York law firm, Waugh, Gottschall and Manges, come in and help us take it to trial. And then, you know, we all work together. So we work with Richard Martinez in Tucson, with a New York law firm, and many, many students. I think there are students who are cursing me still because they had to review Arizona legislative testimony because they don't put that into books. You just have to watch video. And so they're watching the video, they're trying to transcribe, and I'm telling them, you need to have the timestamps exactly right because we need to cite to it. And so, it's been fascinating, to involve the students in doing that work. And then to take it to trial. I got to do my very first objection in life. Like, I did my first witness, and I popped out of my chair and I said, I object. And the judge said, on what grounds? And I was like, in my head, I'm like, I need a reason. It's like, it's objectionable. It's like, don't you know that? And then I looked at the Post-it that I had on the table next to me, and it's like, the common objections. And I guessed the right one because he sustained it. And so, we were able to take it to trial and we got the statute kicked out, both in terms of enforcement and enactment under the First and 14th Amendments. For me, it was so important because you had this state that was telling Mexican-American students that their history, that their stories did not belong in the classroom. And for us, it was also really important to stop it there because we also saw copycat legislation being offered in other states. And so in terms of, thinking about impact, I think we made a difference in Tucson. I think we made a difference in Arizona. And then, I always try to be careful in terms of taking credit, but I also think that we had an impact maybe in stopping this from continuing forward. Now, it's funny because at the same time, some of the same things that the Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction was saying, that person was saying critical race theory is the problem. They focused on that. And then to see this administration doing the same things. So these battles, you see how they're never all, they're battles that you win, but in terms of the war is still going on. And so, we've grown a little bit in terms of the work that we've done.
No, thanks for mentioning that. And yeah, you have to state your objection, and then if you win it, you have to move to strike. Always got to move to strike. And so Arizona represents a space that the Korematsu Center is sort of engaged with, but I know there are other examples. I know right now, I believe the center's working on 2 cases out of Alaska, out of the state of Alaska. Alaska is an interesting place. If you don't mind, could you maybe tell us a little bit about what's going on in those cases and how the Korematsu Center got involved?
Sure. So Alaska is a place where the law school has had a long-standing relationship. So for many years, they had a summer program there. And then recently, we started a third year in Alaska program, although unfortunately, that is winding down. But one of the things that I told Dean Annette Clark was that when she's up there for meetings, if she's talking to advocacy organizations to say that we're here, and if there are ways that we could support their work, that they should reach out to us. And be careful what you offer is because very soon afterwards, somebody from the Alaska Legal Services Corporation contacted us and said, we've got this case. And it was a case involving 2 tribes. And it was the placement of Alaskan Native foster children in a private psychiatric hospital with no judicial oversight. And so initially we got involved doing an amicus in terms of when a hearing should take place. As time went on, they asked us to become co-counsel, and students right now in the clinic in this fall are working on some motions in that case. That case is still going on. It pains me to say that it is still going on. Years later, this was a case filed in 2014. And although there is a preliminary injunction in place, it's not as protective as we want. All the judge has said is you have to have a hearing within 30 days. We think it ought to be 3 days. And so we're still fighting that. And then related to that, the kid said, we're happy that you're doing this, but can you stop them from medicating us? And so we got involved in another case representing a tribe and 2 young men, and it has to do with the administration of psychotropic medication without their consent. And that case is still going. It might be our second trial. We have a trial date of August 2021, and Kate Miller is reading furiously to catch up, to then lead us through to be able to succeed in that effort. Now, another case, Matt, is the Black Lives Matter Seattle-King County case. This is the case involving the use of crowd control weapons by the police against protesters. And so when George Floyd happened and the protests began in Seattle, and we saw in late May and early June the use of force against peaceful protesters. And then David Perez, who's now a partner of Perkins Coie, who was formerly an assistant director in the Korematsu Center, reached out to me and said, we should do something. Now, he caught me at a low moment, I have to confess, because as heartened as I was to see protests erupting around the country, I also had this sense of deja vu. I thought back to Michael Brown. I thought back to Rodney King. And, you know, in terms of the place, it's like, is this moment different? And you can imagine that feeling, like, if you're not sure this moment is different, the sort of, you know, you get weighed down. And so I read Williams versus Wallace, which is the Selma case, the injunction that allowed the march to take place. I watched part of Selma, and then I called him back and said, you know, let's do this. And then we'd arranged to have a phone call the next morning with ACLU, and then we created the legal team and pursued that. We got a TRO pretty quickly. We are still fighting that. Yesterday, we had a 2.5-hour hearing on our second contempt motion. And for us, it was so important to be involved, in part because when I think about change, how does change happen? When we think about law is powerful, absolutely. It's, you know, if I didn't feel it were powerful, I think that I would really need to figure out something else to do with my time. But I also understand law's limits, and I know that protest so often is the basis for change in this country. And so it was so important for us to get involved in that case, because if the police are doing things that inhibit the protests that might bring about change, well, we need to stop that. We need to create the space for these protests to be able to take place. And we worked very hard to create the profile in terms of the plaintiff group. And so as our organizational plaintiff, we have Black Lives Matter, Seattle-King County. And then the other part of it was building something intergenerational and multiracial. And so our 5 named plaintiffs, multiracial, multi-generational, including, we have on this call one of the plaintiffs, I'm gonna, you know, Sharon Sakamoto. Sharon. And, you know, it's where if we were in a room together, this would just be such a different experience. And so we would, you know, Sharon.
It's been such a privilege to work with the Korematsu Center on this matter, but other matters as well. But, you know, Bob asked if I would represent a generation of people who, out of fear of the police brutality, would be robbed of our participation, our First Amendment rights to actually join in this group and join the protesters and be among the peaceful ones. But when it turns violent, then our rights are actually violated as well. Our rights to be there with the others and make peaceful protest and make ourselves heard. So I was thrilled to be a part of this and was grateful to the Korematsu Center for even asking that I would consider participating. It's I'm thrilled and grateful, and feel great privilege to be associated with this center and the work they're doing.
Thanks for sharing that, Sharon.
I'm sorry?
Thank you for sharing that, Sharon.
Yeah.
Professor Chang, I guess that kind of brings me to one of the questions that was asked by Nelson Dong. I didn't get the class here, so I can't give a shout out to the class here, but Nelson, I know you're out there somewhere. Are there certain, I think I have an idea, but are there certain cases that what kind of cases do you prefer to have referred or referred to the center? Or do you seek out certain cases? His question verbatim would be, what kinds of cases do you prefer to have as referrals to the center?
Sure. And so Nelson is not an alum of the law school, but he's a good friend of the Korematsu Center. And I also have to really acknowledge that it was his work that led the Dorsey and Whitney Foundation to give us our first substantial donation, $10,000. And I love Nelson because when the Dorsey and Whitney Foundation and Nelson told us about this, I emailed Nelson right away and said, are we going to have a big check? And the advancement people at SU said, that's so gauche, you don't do those things anymore. But Nelson was like right on with it. And so I was trying to look in my files for that picture, but I don't have it. But we have a picture of a big check from the Dorsey and Whitney Foundation. And I hope if you have a picture of that, Nelson, that you'll share that with us later. Do you remember that, Nelson?
I most certainly do. Thanks for remembering.
Thank you. And so in terms of the kinds of cases that we like to have referred to us or prefer to have referred to us, well, part of it is remembering, what is it that we can bring to a case? And so especially in terms of my perspective on things, I came into the legal academy writing in the area of critical race theory. And so things that are very much race-oriented that fits with the kind of expertise that we're able to offer. And so, part of that is my own comfort zone in terms of the kind of case. We also really try to think about those cases that are under-resourced, and then also to think about the kinds of cases where we can have an impact. And also in a way that isn't simply just saying something or doing something that somebody else might do or say. And so sometimes cases get referred to us, though somebody will call us and say, we've got this case. And then Jesse and Melissa often, I think, sort of cringe when I email them and say, we've got this case, that they're asking about this. Do you think we can do it? And I don't know what kinds of conversations they have offline, but they most often support these efforts. We also really think in terms of the profile that this is a center that really thinks strategically about building multiracial coalition in part through the work that we do. And so the Arizona Ethnic Studies case, the Alaska cases, the BLM case, the work on race in the criminal justice system, the work that we've done in terms of jury selection, both in Washington state and around the country. As an example, one inquiry that came in a few years ago, and this is a case that Ebony Parr worked on, but Decarius Holiday in Louisiana, the sentenced to death, and his counsel reached out to us and asked, is there something that you might do in terms of an amicus brief? And in particular, they wanted us to focus on a race dimension, and it was a race and gender dimension about the veneer. And so even though there were 3 Black women who were seated on that capital jury, there were no men in the veneer, no Black men in the veneer. And so trying to educate intersectionality in terms of critical race theory, bringing that voice into the litigation. We weren't actually very optimistic that the Louisiana Supreme Court, as it is currently constituted, would welcome this. But at the same time, it's getting those arguments out there, because a lot of times you find that you don't win the first time, or you don't win maybe in one particular area or jurisdiction, but you develop the expertise that then you're able to use someplace else where you then might have that impact. Sometimes we get cases because I read the news, it's like, January 20, whatever, 2017, the Muslim travel ban, we ended up doing a lot of work around the abuses of executive authority. And in part, we thought that the Korematsu Center and the legacy that we were trying to advance with Fred really fit with that. That also then fed into the census citizenship case that we got involved in, and some other executive order actions.
I think I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge Sharon Sakamoto. I apologize, class of '85, founding president of the Asian Bar Association, I think a pillar in our legal community. And while we're acknowledging people who are participating, I think that, we should all take a moment. I appreciate all you've done. You might not be able to tell through Zoom, I'm half Korean. It's thank you for your contributions. And I want to just acknowledge that.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it.
And I'm sure a lot of other people share my sentiment. Thank you, Joe and Watt, as well. So before, I want to leave some time so we can sort of have questions from the participants. But before I do, I figured we've kind of discussed the past, the origins, and we've discussed the present, the litigation that you've been working on. I think that would be a good segue to Sandy Brown, class of '98's question, which is, assuming the election results are known, what's your biggest concern moving forward related to the center's work?
Sure. So it's funny because thinking about how to answer this question, it changes day to day, right? It's like, I don't know if all of you are watching all of the crazy lawsuits that are going on around the country. It's like, there are times when I'm really calm, but then there are times when I get really stressed out again. If the administration, if we have the peaceful transition of power that I expect, ought to happen in the ordinary course of things, I'm really relieved that I think that we won't have to spend the kind of energy that we have had to put in to try to stop some of the excesses of executive power. At the same time, I'm cognizant that just because you have a Democratic administration, it doesn't mean that everything they're going to do is going to be okay. And so we'll always be watching to make sure that things aren't done that are inconsistent with our approach and our values to things. It's interesting thinking about how, one of my hopes with the administration changing is also that all of this pro bono energy that has had to go into stopping the things that this administration has been doing, the travel ban, the DACA rescission, it just goes on and on and on, that energy can be put to other uses. In some ways, that's also my great hope in terms of if capital punishment goes away, finally everywhere, right? We're so lucky in Washington State versus Gregory in 2018. But if it goes away everywhere, all of this energy that gets put into, and we understand why, because death is final. And we know that we need to keep it from happening. I'm trying to keep my eye on what's happening today, right? 6:45 was the deadline for the government to challenge the judge's order stopping Mr. Hall's execution, or putting a stay on Mr. Hall's execution. I just think about how much that energy could be put to so many other places where we need this. And so I'm really excited. Well, I'm hopeful that things happen the way that I think they should.
Thank you. And so this last question will be kind of probably a tandem question, but for those of us who want to support the Korematsu Center, what can we do to support it and help further its mission? And then secondly, are there any sort of final thoughts you would like to leave us with? I know we're kind of living in these crazy times with political upheaval, racial reckoning, uncertainty as it comes to our election process, the very core of our democracy. Like, what can we do to help out? And what do you want to tell us before we open it up for everyone?
Sure. So, one of the things that I really want to acknowledge is we benefit so much from attorneys working with us on various matters. And so with many of the executive order cases, the law firm Aiken Gump in New York, has put in so much in terms of resources. Weil Gottschall, in terms of the resources they put into the Arizona Ethnic Studies case, you can't put a price tag in terms of when people put in their time and their talent to advance these efforts. At the same time, you also have Weil Gottschall contributing $150,000 to help fund the Weil Gottschall and Manjus LLC Advocacy Fellowship. Resources are the things that allow us to do more. And I would, of course, be remiss if I didn't also talk about Jim Degel and Jeannie Berwick, who are, they're like, you're talking about me. Yes, I have to talk about you. So how do you express the gratitude for the people who have really allowed you to do this kind of work? And so, as an example, they funded our first clinical teaching fellowship, which allowed us to do the civil rights clinic without me committing malpractice. It was neat because it was part of our vision in terms of training somebody to enter into the legal academy and then to have an impact that way. But it was also really neat because we were then able to point out the things that we did, things like the Arizona Ethnic Studies case, the case that Chris was involved in. When we had a ceremony to recognize that gift, I described that I told the story about my fairy godmother. So I grew up with a fairy godmother. In 4th grade, I played violin in school. The teacher thought I had some talent, but my family was not in a position to be able to afford private lessons. And then when the summer came around, when the music was going to stop because school was done, I got this note and it said, go to this and this place and signed your fairy godmother. And it was literally signed your fairy godmother. And this woman paid for my lessons from that point in time through high school. And I really learned then the transformative power that gifts can have. And I described Jim and Jeannie as our fairy godparents. And they've continued in that. They gave after that this next gift that allowed us to hire Jesse and Melissa as staff attorney assistant directors. And then they also matched Weil Gottschall's gift that allows us to have 2 advocacy fellows. And I know there's so many others here who have been very generous with the center. So Lloyd and Julie, they're in my corner over here. I don't know where they are for all of you. Sharon Sakamoto, Judge Harriet Cody, and I know that I'm missing people here, and I apologize for that. Nelson Dong personally, and also with the Dorsey and Whitney Foundation, and also in terms of the support through the Asian Bar Association of Washington Foundation. There's so much that we want to do. And Karen Korematsu is now here. How long have you been here, Karen?
Well, be careful what you say, because I had the program on my phone because I had a drive. And so I've heard you from the very beginning.
And here I was thinking, and I'm so glad I didn't know, because I would have been tongue-tied. And so it was liberating to have you as iPhone.
Yeah. Well, by the way, no, I don't have a sister, and but it was just my mother and I that were at that rainy meeting. I mean, oh my gosh, it was a downpour. I thought we were all going to wash away in Oakland. Yes, that was very fond memories. And I'm glad that my mother was around at that time to be a part of this, because she was so thrilled that the center was going to be at Seattle University School of Law. And Bob and Lori and everyone have done such phenomenal work. I'm so proud of all of you. And I keep talking about you all the time. So sorry to kind of butt in there, but you opened it up.
No, and so this is so neat, and you know, when I think about how Karen, it was a little over a year ago that I last saw you in person. Is we're sitting there in that hotel lobby in Austin, Texas, and I so look forward to the next time I get to see you. But you know, Zoom is this wonderful thing where, you know, you're able to just pop in like this, which is wonderful. And, you know, this is something that Karen Korematsu also understands in terms of the limitations. You know, so Karen operates the Korematsu Institute and does an amazing work in terms of education, creating educational materials, and also direct education of students and teachers. And so, you know, in terms of the work that she's able to do, the work that we're able to do, you know, Matt, you asked, well, what can people do? Well, time and talent, I can't put a price on that. But then also, there is the support that people can give to the center that allows us to do even more. Because we have lots of ideas. And the other thing is, there is also so much need. It breaks my heart each time when I get a handwritten pro se petition that, and you know, and when I look at it, and I was like, this is better work than a lot of what the lawyers are doing in the election law cases. It's like, you know, it's heartbreaking that there aren't enough resources to support all of the things that we want to do. We're so lucky, of course, in terms of how much we have in terms of our current staff and in terms of how many people work with us. And so, you know, in terms of thoughts before we move on, you know, the other work that we're doing right now is we've revived a task force on race in Washington's criminal justice system, really trying to answer this moment in terms of George Floyd, this moment of racial reckoning. And I think in a lot of ways, we're really ready to do this, in part because of our work 10 years ago, but also because of all of the work that we've done, being able to involve people around the state in this effort. Because if we're not able to step up to this moment now, I worry, you know, the next time David Perez calls and says, do you want to do something? And it's like, I don't know, I may remain in my disheartened state. It's like, it's the challenge I think that we all need to face. I really hate it that we are so distracted now by the election and the post-election things. Because when we think about that moment and the sort of the surge in energy around the country, around race and policing, and the on the streets and in legislative halls, and I just fear that if we don't continue moving us along that trajectory, that we will have failed to answer this moment.
No, thank you for saying that. I feel like everyone on this call has the agency and the power to do something in this moment. And to not do anything is maybe one of the worst things that we could possibly do. And so we have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to be respectful of everyone's time, but I also wanted to leave some time for people to engage in this town hall. You know, because that is sort of how the traditional town hall would work. You would come together and you would talk about issues and you would try to reach consensus. And if you couldn't, you didn't hate each other for it. Seems like a bygone era. Does anyone want to jump in and, you know, ask Professor Chang any questions about the Korematsu Center or things that he discussed today? Don't all speak up at once.
I've got my eye on the chat if anybody wants to submit their question through the chat.
Oh, how's it
Or-
going, Dean Clark? I didn't see either. How's it going?
Or I think you could also just mute yourself and volunteer. I'm thinking, I love that we've called this a town hall style discussion, but I think we could honestly call it a family style discussion. I like the direction it's going.
And I see Lloyd there with Julie. Lloyd, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, I went through the evening program, and I'm wondering, are you involving the evening program at all in your work?
So it's been harder for us to involve evening students. So on occasion, we have been able to. Part of the problem is for our clinic is that they need to commit to 17.5 hours during regular business hours. And so unless they have a lot of flexibility, that creates a real challenge. But one of the first clinic students was an evening student when we did not have as stringent a time commitment. And it was neat because he actually got to argue a case to the Ninth Circuit. We took a case through the Ninth Circuit pro bono program. We have a part-time student now this fall. She's able to do it, I think, in part because of the pandemic. And so, but you raise an important question and challenge to us and the law school in terms of making sure that we provide comparable experiential opportunities for evening students.
No, thank you for that question. Is there anyone else who had a question? Doesn't even have to be an interesting question.
I think Jim and I just wanted to thank Bob and everybody at the center and all the students and faculty who've been involved in leading the charge to advance equality and justice. And we've been living in pretty dark times these last several years. And it's been so important for me to, and for us to have bright lights in the darkness. And I definitely count the center's work and Bob as an important bright light. So we just wanted to call that out and say thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And was that is that Jim Degel, class of 1980?
Sure is.
All right.
We both have our pandemic look going on, so a lot of people don't know who we are, but yes, we are, Jeannie and Jim.
So SU can't claim officially Jeannie, but Jeannie does serve on the Seattle University Board of Trustees, and so we have the broader university has claimed her. She's one of us now.
That's great.
Bob, can you talk a little bit about the juvenile sentencing work the center does and the ways in which those issues are connected with racial disproportionality?
Sure. So great question. We've been involved in juvenile justice issues and a lot with regard to juvenile sentencing since our first clinic and maybe even before our first clinic. So this goes back to 2011 and also highlights in some ways that we work with people in other law schools. So Kim Ambrose, who is a professor at UW, who teaches a clinic there, reached out to us and said, we've got this client, Guadalupe Solis Diaz, and he was sentenced to 1,111 months in prison. You can ask Siri later, but I think that works out to 92 or 93 years, somewhere between 92 and 93 years. He was 17, drive-by shooting, but nobody was hurt. Nobody was hit by any of the bullets that he fired. But they charged a different victim for each bullet that was fired. They charged weapon enhancements on each of them. And what we knew about this was not just the injustice of his particular case, but this is an issue that had a particular impact on juveniles in terms of the way the juvenile sentencing operated. So we got involved in that case and we've stayed involved, just really trying to advance the changes in terms of the US Supreme Court jurisprudence that recognizes that children are different And then really excited that we have a court that doesn't feel like it needs to just do what the US Supreme Court says is minimally required, that has gone on to do things like to say that categorically juvenile life without parole is not permitted in Washington state under the Washington state Constitution. You know, so our work in this area is in a lot of ways driven by the race disproportionality, but it doesn't mean that all of our clients are racial minorities, because we also think about cases as having an impact beyond the particular instance. One example is one of our clients where he's serving a death in prison sentence. So, you know, that's the other way that we try to you know, change the way that we use our language. Instead of life without parole, it's a death in prison sentence. That's what he's serving. And he's there under the Persistent Offender Act, so the 3 strikes law. 94, Washington passed the first most draconian 3 strikes law. And his first strike, he was 16 years old. And if we can knock that strike out in terms of it counting based on the changes in juvenile jurisprudence, the impact that it will have in terms of ameliorating one small area of race disproportionality. And so it's been exciting to do this work. And, you know, we've supported other cases around the country. So this is an instance where, although the work began in Washington state, it's led to us doing work around the country.
Erin, I'd like to say something since you brought up family, and that's the way I think of Seattle School of Law and certainly the Korematsu Center and everyone there. I also would like to give a shout out to Dean Clark for all her support over the years to make sure that the Korematsu Center can carry on with their work. Bob and Lori, Margaret, and all the other professors there have just been phenomenal. And, you know, Matt was talking about impact. Well, I didn't hear, unless I missed it kind of in transition, you know, how Bob was instrumental in bringing in Aiken Gump in support of the amicus brief for Trump versus Hawaii. And even though that didn't go the way we wanted to go, but it was important work. And actually, I think with immigration is certainly going to be a focus of the next administration. So we have, you know, to be continued, in my opinion. And also, you know, the fact that Bob was talking about, you know, protecting our right in this democracy and under our Constitution to protest peacefully and to uphold that in our courts. My father said, you know, protest, but not with violence. Otherwise, they won't listen to you. But don't be afraid to speak up.
Thank you, Dr. Korematsu. It's been a privilege to have you here today. It's been a privilege to have all of you here today. And I think with that, we have reached our time. Thank you so much, Professor Chang. Thank you so much, Matt. It's been a real joy to spend the evening together with you all. And with that, I think we will sign off for now.
It's been a real pleasure. Go Hawks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Until next
Thank you
time,
very
my
much.
friend.
Thanks, Professor Chang.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.